Greetings and salutations, Greek students. We continue our study of the Greek language by looking at some examples of the perfect tense, particularly the forms that the perfect tense verbs can take. So the perfect active indicative is identified by two regular features in the form of the verb. The first is the suffix with a kappa. There's the kappa suffix. So ka in the first person singular, kas in the second person singular, ken, common, kati, kasi. So ka, kas, ken, common, kati, kasi. And notice in the third person singular and the third person plural, they both have these movable news that can sometimes attach and sometimes not. The other morphological feature of the perfect tense that's really identifiable is the reduplication prefix. So remember, with the aorist and with the imperfect, you have the epsilon prefix, right? So whenever we see a verb with that epsilon prefix, our brains tingle. We get our Greek sense of going, oh, this is either an aorist or an imperfect verb. When we come to the perfect tense, what we're going to see is not just an epsilon prefix, but we're going to see a reduplication. So in the case of luo, I loose, you have the reduplication leluka. The reduplication lelukas, leluken, lelukamen, lelukate, lelukasi. So that reduplication, not just the epsilon prefix, but the reduplication of the consonant is the sign of the perfect tense. So there are, of course, some common exceptions. So one is in aspirated consonants, theta, phi, chi. They're reduplicated in their unaspirated form. That is, instead of having thelo reduplicate to thel, thelka, you're going to have it be teth, thelka, because you don't want to have the theta reduplicated. It's hard to go thith, thith, thith. So you go teth. Or instead of having phoneo, a verb that starts with a phi, it being fef, it goes to pef, or kech, it just goes to kek, kech. So these aspirated consonants, that is consonants that kind of have an H sound built into them, fef, the, ki, are prefixed with their unaspirated forms. Theta becomes tau, phi becomes p, and chi becomes kappa. There are also double consonants. So when you have an E prefix, whenever a verb stem begins with a double consonant, zeta, psi, xi, these are consonants that have an S and another sound built into them. The reduplication shifts to an epsilon prefix. So even though you expect to see the epsilon prefix on the imperfect and the aorist, you can also see it on the perfect tense with these verbs that begin with a zeta, with a psi, or a kasi. There's also the feature of vowel lengthening. Sometimes you have verbs that begin with vowels, akuo, heitoi madzo. And when that happens, the vowel lengthens instead of reduplicating. So instead of heitoi madzo, it becomes heitoi maka, heitoi maka. Like second aorist verbs, which don't have the sigma morpheme, typical of the aorist tense, right? So remember, in those second aorist, what happens is the stem of the verb changes. You have the epsilon prefix, the stem changes, and then the ending looks like your imperfect endings. But those are second aorist because the stem has changed. There are some second perfects that are irregular, and you just have to memorize these. There's 21 in the New Testament, but they're typically pretty identifiable because of one or another feature of the irregularity. So you can kind of pick up on them. It's not worth memorizing all of the different ones. You'll just sort of pick them up as you go. A common one, grapho. So grapho, I write, in the perfect becomes, in the first person, gegrapha. So you don't have your kappa. It's not there. And the phi is still there. So you have the alpha, but the reduplication in this instance is the dead giveaway. gegrapha, gegraphas, gegraphen, gegraphamen, gegraphate, gegraphasi. So in this case, the only major difference in the second perfect of grapho is that you lose the kappa that you typically see on the perfect tense, but you still have the reduplication. So look, that reduplication is your sign, oh, I'm looking at a perfect tense verb. Other common principal parts of the second perfect, N. Clayton Croy gives more examples on page 87, but like akuo becomes akeokoa, akeokoa, or petho, I persuade, or I've trusted in, becomes pepoitha. Pempo, I send, becomes pepamfa, I have sent. Pasco becomes pepantha, I have suffered. So in each of these cases, or each of these instances, you can see that there's some kind of reduplication happening that gives you a good indicator. Oh, I'm looking at a perfect tense verb. And again, there's more examples of what these look like, but these are not overwhelmingly common. Okay, there's also the perfect middle passive. So just like we saw with the imperfect, just like we saw with the present middle passive, the middle and the passive form of the perfect tense are the same. As you should come to expect, these middle passives, perfects, usually occur, the most you're going to see them is on examples of the passive voice, or more commonly, those deponent verbs like erkomai and poruomai and apokrinomai, and those omai ending verbs that are middle passive in form, but they're active in meaning. So luo, for example, becomes lelumai, lelusai, lelutai, lelumetha, lelusthe, leluntai. So this is like omai a etai, amatha esthe, antai, but it's a little bit different. And again, the dead giveaway here, aside from these middle passive endings, is the reduplication, the lelu. So you would translate this, I have been loosed, you have been loosed, he, she, it has been loosed. So it's the present state of this past action. It's something that happened in the past, the loosing happened in the past, but it's now the result of that past action. You also have the perfect infinitive. So we've seen the present infinitive, luain, to be loosing, the aorist, loosai, to loose, the perfect active, lelukenai, to have loosed, and then the perfect middle passive infinitive, lelusthai. Now in this case, this is the perfective, this gets at, in the infinitive, you're only talking about aspect, how the verb's being described, because the infinitive mood doesn't have tense in the sort of, it's talking about when verbs are happening, it's talking about how the verbs are being described. We'll talk about infinitives more down the line, but for now, that should be enough of what you need to know. There's also, we've talked about the perfect, now we're looking at the pluperfect. The main difference here is that the perfect tense is the present state of a past action, right? So I'm thinking about what's happening now because of this thing that happened back then. The pluperfect just pushes that back. So instead of thinking about now what happened back then, I'm thinking about back then what happened even prior to that event. That's the past state of a past action. So elelu kain, I had loosed. Elelu case, you had loosed. Elelu ke, he, she, it had loosed. Elelu kemen, we had loosed. Elelu kete, you had loosed. Elelu kesan, they had loosed. Now these pluperfect verbs, notably, you have the reduplication that you would expect on the perfect, but you also have the epsilon prefix and the reduplication. So you sort of are combining features that you see in the perfect and in the imperfect, and you're getting the pluperfect, right? So addition by addition. New Testament examples are quite rare. There was a man called Barabbas who was in prison with the rebels who had committed pepoie kesan, murder, during the insurrection in Mark 15:7. So this is talking about how these rebels are in the past state of having committed a crime, that is, having murdered during the insurrection in Mark 15:7. In John 4:8, this is when Jesus is in the village in Samaria, and he happens to meet this woman by a well. And the story begins by pointing out that his disciples had gone into the city to buy their food. So the disciples aren't there because they are in the past state of this past action of having left to go get food. So it's just a way of pushing the perfect tense a little bit further into the past, into the pluperfect. So that introduces us to the perfect tense forms with the reduplication, le, lu, ka, kas, ke, kamen, kate, kasi, and as well as the pluperfect, or the perfect middle passive, lelu, mai, sai, tai, metha, sthe, and tai, and the perfect, the pluperfect, elelu, kain, case, ke, kamen, kati, kasan. So these are the forms of the perfect and the pluperfect